Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're opening the books, pulling back the curtain on our modern monetary system. We're going to dig into the hidden mechanics, the unseen architecture that, believe it or not, really determines who gets wealthy and why.
So, let me ask you, where does money really come from? You probably think, well, it's printed by the government, or it's something I earn from my job. But what if I told you that most of the money in our economy isn't printed at all? What if it's just created with a keystroke? And not by governments, but by private banks. That's the kind of mind-blowing reality we're diving into.
You see, we operate inside this thing called a fiat money system. That just means our money exists because the government says it does. It's not backed by gold or anything physical, just confidence. And to really get our heads around this, we have to look at the three main players, the three big pillars holding it all up. You've got the central banks, the commercial banks, and this ever-present hum of government debt.
Okay, so let's break this down. It turns out money isn't just born in one place. There are actually two creation engines chugging away. One is public, run by the central authority. The other, it's private, and you'll see in a second, it's way, way more powerful.
All right, engine number one, the central bank. This is where something called base money comes from. Now think of this as the foundation of the whole system, the bedrock. It's the digital reserves that commercial banks hold. When a central bank, like the Fed or the RBA in Australia, buys assets like government bonds, poof, it creates this base money. It's kind of like the seed money for the entire financial world.
But here's the kicker. The other engine, the one that really runs the show, is the commercial banking sector. We're talking about the regular banks you and I use. They create what's called broad money, which is basically all the money we use every day. And how do they do it? They create it literally out of thin air, every single time they make a loan. This is where it gets really wild. So how is a loan actually born? It's not what you think. The bank doesn't take money from someone else's savings account to give to you. No, when they approve your loan, they do two things at the exact same time. On one side of their ledger, the loan is an asset for them. On the other side, they create a brand new deposit in your account, which is a liability for them. An asset and a liability created simultaneously with a few keystrokes. It's pure accounting magic. And if you're wondering how big of a deal this is, well, look at this. The scale is just staggering. In places like Australia or the UK, it's estimated that commercial banks create about 97% of the entire money supply. Let that sink in. The central bank might pour the concrete foundation, but it's the private banks that build the entire skyscraper on top of it.
Okay, so we've established that most money is just debt. But so what? What are the consequences of a system built entirely on credit? Well, it's definitely not a neutral thing. It has these massive, profound consequences that ripple through and shape pretty much everything in our economy.
What this system does is it basically creates two completely different economic realities, two different tracks for people. On one track, you have capital owners. These are folks whose income comes from assets, rent, dividends, profits. And because they have assets, they can use them as collateral to get more of that cheap bank-created credit. This helps them buy more assets, which then go up in price. Now, on the other track, you have wage-dependent households. Their income is from their labor. They don't have that collateral, so they're largely locked out of that cheap credit system. And their savings? Well, they often get eaten away by inflation.
And this reliance on debt becomes just baked into the cake. Look at Australia, for example. Household debt is sitting at around 190% of household income. That means for every single dollar an Australian household earns, they owe almost $2 in debt. And guess what the biggest driver of that is? You guessed it, mortgages. The housing market is honestly the perfect example of how this all works. Think about it. A property owner leverages bank-created money to buy an asset, a house. Now, a renter goes to work, earns a wage, and pays that money to the owner as rent. That rent money then flows from the owner to the bank to service the interest on the loan. It's this perfect circular engine, where the labor of the renter ultimately services the debt that created the asset for the owner.
But wait, there's more. This whole dynamic doesn't just happen on its own. Oh no. It gets a massive turbo boost from a central bank policy that you've probably heard of, quantitative easing, or as it's better known, QE.
QE really kicked off in Japan, but it went global in a huge way after the 2008 financial crisis, and then it went into overdrive during the pandemic. We're talking about central banks creating trillions, literally trillions of dollars out of thin air to buy up government bonds and other assets. The goal was to pump a tidal wave of liquidity into the financial system. So where did all that new money go? The effect is pretty stark when you look at it. It didn't really flow into Main Street. No, it flowed into Wall Street. It poured into financial assets, pushing stock prices and, you guessed it, housing prices into the stratosphere. At the same time, what happened to wage growth for the average person? It just plodded along, struggling to keep up, and in many cases, not even matching the rising cost of just living your life.
Okay, so we've seen the financial side, but how does this get locked into place in the real world? This is where the financial system gets reinforced by the physical world. Let's stick with Australia as a case study here, because it's a really powerful example of how this all connects. This is where the numbers on a screen meet actual bricks and mortar.
It turns out the systems we have for planning and development can often create a kind of artificial scarcity. You get these insane delays in approvals, sometimes hundreds of days. The legal costs to challenge anything are so high that it blocks out the little guys. Meanwhile, if you're a big developer with the right connections, you might find the process mysteriously gets a lot faster. It creates a playing field that is anything but level.
And this gets to a really core truth of the whole thing. The system isn't just about managing land use. It's about rationing the permission to build. And when you ration something, it becomes valuable. Zoning itself becomes the asset. That permission slip becomes a commodity that gets bought and sold, pushing property values even higher.
So let's step back and connect all these dots. You have money being created as debt by private banks. You have that debt flowing into assets, making them more expensive. And then you have physical world rules that create scarcity, making those assets even more expensive. When you put it all together, a really clear picture starts to form. This outcome? It doesn't look like an accident. It looks like a design.
Now, to be clear, economists are really divided on this. There's a big debate. On one side, you have schools of thought like modern monetary theory, or MMT. They basically see this system as a powerful tool. They say, hey, as long as we manage inflation, we can use this power for the public good. But on the other side, you have Austrian and monetarist economists who look at this and see a recipe for disaster. They say it's an inherently dangerous machine that creates asset bubbles, distorts prices, and just kicks the can down the road to an inevitable crisis.
But no matter which side of that debate you're on, here's what seems to be the crucial takeaway. The ever-widening wealth gap that we see all over the world, maybe it isn't a bug. Maybe it's not a flaw or a side effect. Maybe it's the feature. It seems to be the logical, predictable output of how the system is designed. The engine is doing exactly what it was built to do.
So understanding this architecture, this unseen engine, is the first and most important step. But it leaves us with the really big question, doesn't it? If the system is designed this way, what does that mean for us?